Welcome back to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway, a special Westminster edition in the wake of the Prime Minister's surprising call for a general election on June the 8th. I'm joined by a Tory grandee who's never had the garlands that he deserves, but a former minister, former Tory mayoral candidate here in London, and an all-round wise guy and good one. Steve, Theresa May is up against, as you pointed out, an opposition at the lowest levels, predicted to get the lowest parliamentary representation since 1935. Yeah. But just like Trump, there is a possibility that Jeremy Corbyn might, as it were, set the country alight with expectation, with possibility. There's a lot of anti-Tory feeling, particularly in poor places, post-industrial places, parts of the kingdom which are far from her home county's kind of appeal. Do you discount that possibility entirely?
No, you talked about how you were the only person who thought that we'd leave the EU and the only person who thought we'd elect Donald Trump. I won a lot of money on the EU referendum. Unfortunately, I lost the lot on Trump, so don't ask me. However, I do remember John Howard. John Howard, the Australian Premier, who found himself in a position where he was way ahead in the opinion polls. His party just won a surprisingly good by-election. He decided to go to the country and 5 weeks later was ousted by a Labour administration which actually won 75 out of 125 seats in their lower house. I mean, in other words, these surprises can happen. So do I discount it completely? No. And I think it would be foolish for anybody ever to do so. Jeremy Corbyn has surprised many, many people already. When he was finally included in the lineup for the Labour leadership alongside such titans as Andy, never known to claw defeat from the jaws of victory, Burnham, or Yvette Cooper or whatever, he surprised everybody, I suspect, by winning and winning by a big margin. 200 to 1 and won by a clear margin. So do I discount it? No, I don't. However, I think what's interesting is the way that dynamics have changed. Theresa May has won a grudging respect, even from people who are not natural Tories. And it's to do, I think, with her personal character. She's pretty tough. She is not given to sound bites. She is thought of as somebody who tells it as it is. She's even able, I suspect, to persuade people that even though she said, I'm not going to have an election, I'm not going to have an election, I'm not, and so on, many times over, and then says, I am, she's able to persuade people that somehow this is consistent with the line that she's taking. And that's quite a trick. I think the last person we saw with that kind of ability was of course, Tony Blair, and prior to that, Margaret Thatcher. Neither John Major, nor Gordon Brown, nor David Cameron had that ability. And so I suspect this will be more than ever about personalities, about who do you want to lead us in this uncertain time when we are facing a Brexit negotiation, which is either going to go very well or very badly. And it's worth, therefore, I think, more reflecting on the time when, for example, Michael Foot led the Labour Party, and you will remember this very, very well indeed. And again, it became a choice between Thatcher, who had just apparently personally won the Falklands War, and Michael Foot, who was seen as completely out of touch and, far too old.
From another world.
And from another world.
But I'll tell you something about Corbyn. And I think you know this, he's a good and honest person. Yeah. He's sincere. He has principles. And the one thing he's good at, he's not that great in the House of Commons, though he's got better. The one thing he's good at is out there on the street. And that's where his election will be fought. It is possible that he can capture the zeitgeist, capture the imagination against a rather straight-laced Tory leadership and Tory campaign.
I can't disagree with that, George. I think that's right. I mean, he I mean, I've known him for the 30-odd years, not as long as you, but I've certainly known him as a fellow member of the House of Commons. He is clearly a man of integrity. He's a man who sticks by his principles. He's a man who tells it the way he sees it and not the way he's told to see it. I get all that. And I also get the fact that he's good on the stump. I mean, I saw him out in Croydon, which is a swing seat yesterday, and he was full of fire and vigour, and I think he'll go on doing that during the election campaign. He's no Michael Foot in that context. No. It's also true that Mrs May is not a great natural orator, not by any means. She's more comfortable reading a speech than she is extemporising, and I always think that, I mean, you can do this, and I like to think I used to be able to do it, you know. To extemporise is to have been seen to be speaking from the heart. Yeah. So can this have a big impact? Yes, it could. I think the problem that Jeremy Corbyn has, however, is that his opposition is mainly from his own party.
His back is full of holes.
His back is full of holes. This is a man who has MPs in his own party saying, we're going to stand as a Labour candidate, but we would never vote for him as a Prime Minister.
Yes, it's quite unprecedented.
That's unprecedented.
Now, the Liberals, on the face of it, were dead and buried in 2015. Brexit has undoubtedly given them some more wind in their sails, how much we shall see. But they're running unequivocally as the second referendum people. That's right. Try to scupper Brexit, and if we can't scupper it, make it as moderate break as possible. 48% of the people voted to remain in the EU, so that's a potential vote bank of some importance if people all got behind the Liberals. What do you think of that?
Well, I remember Zach Goldsmith, who, for completely separate reasons, resigned and put himself up for re-election. That was over the issue of building a third runway at Heathrow. But nonetheless, it was immediately after a time when he had voted to leave. His father, of course, famously founded the Referendum Party, and so his views were very clear. But his constituents were overwhelmingly for Remain. And they ditched him. And that was because the Lib Dems were able to say, well, we, of course, are Remainers, and we will stick up for you, and we represent you. And who's to say what impact that will have? I have a sneaking suspicion that there will be a few Liberal wins against Tories in seats that they previously held, and it will be on that basis. However, again, you know, I really do sense that time has moved on. Every poll tells us that many people who did vote Remain are now resigned to the democratic vote.
That's my own experience.
And then they're saying, OK, so who's going to be best to negotiate the best deal for us? And it's not Tim Farron. You know, in the end, you and I know it's the one thing that unites all Tories and all Labour politicians is that the Lib Dems are the most cynical party in British politics.
Yes, everyone hates them.
We all hate the Liberal Democrats. It's a famous sport in this country, but it has some merit as well.
I predict here that they'll go from 8 to certainly double figures, maybe 30 or so.
Maybe 20,
MPs.
maybe 30.
They'll do quite well.
Mrs May, of course, banks on the idea that she will more than make up the difference in areas where we, as a party, the Conservatives, haven't necessarily been prominent for a generation. It was significant to me that she appeared yesterday in Bolton, in what is now a Labour seat, but was a Tory seat back in the 90s, and she sees us able to win that kind of a seat. Now, that's quite a pitch. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn was in Croydon, a seat that is now held by a Tory, but is pretty marginal. He too is looking to be able to shift that one. But I think her view is that, yes, there'll be a bit of collateral damage from the Lib Dems, but it'll be more than overtaken by the seats that she wins in places where the sense is among Labour voters that we've always been Labour, but we can't vote for Jeremy Corbyn as a leader. Now, this decent, honourable man that you and I have just discussed faces that huge, huge problem of credibility as a leader.
Well, we'll see. What about UKIP, who are between... well, I don't know if they're between leaders. I think Nuttall is still the leader. Nigel Farage is clearly the leader, but he's over the water, and we don't know if he's going to run again. Are UKIP done and dusted, do you think? Is there a historic achievement to have got the referendum, to have seen it go their way, and that many people think there's not really that much further point for them?
I think Mrs May has shot their fox. although she was a Remainer, technically, if what maybe somewhat reluctantly, after the vote, and when she was elected as, or appointed almost as leader of the Tory party, she made that famous, wonderfully Delphic comment, Brexit means Brexit. We could have a whole programme discussing what that means. But nonetheless, it's there. You know, what it did say was, I'm not going to overturn this. We are going to leave, and I am going to get the best deal that I can for the UK. And everything that she said after that is really simply making UKIP's position, frankly, now irrelevant. They'll, of course, say, well, we've got to hold our feet to the fire and so on. But A, the present leader, Paul Nuttall, is frankly incredible. And I mean that in the sense that so far we can't believe a word he says. And B, that Nigel Farage may or may not decide to stand in Thanet South, a seat that he's fought and lost in before. Whether he does or not, he's not going to be as prominent or, frankly, have the same case to make as he was able to make in 2015. So UKIP, for me, not surprising that the increased lead that the Tories got in recent polls all came not at the expense of Labour, but actually at the expense of UKIP.
Finally, then, many people thought initially, not I, but many thought that Mrs. May is going for a bigger majority to drive through a hard Brexit. I think the opposite. I think she wants to have a mandate and have enough hinterland around her that she can make the deal, and her instincts as a Remainer, in fact, are likely to see Britain negotiate more of a sweetheart deal with the EU rather than the break that the Brexiteers perhaps imagined.
I couldn't agree more. In simple terms, I couldn't agree more. You know, speaking as somebody who voted to leave, I believe that we should take back control of our borders and our laws. I believe that we should be acting in the interest of the British people unequivocally. I dislike unelected bureaucracies being able to dictate to a country that still calls itself a country. But, for example, taking back control of our borders is not going to mean closing them unless we really do want to commit economic suicide. We need migrants. This country will need migrants for the foreseeable future to deal with the expansion in our economy. We're still the fastest growing economy in the G7. Now, you know, Mrs. May, precisely as you say, is not going to get re-elected in order to push some kind of let's split each other's lip kind of conclusion with the EU. On the contrary, it's precisely to say, you don't want tariffs, neither do we. We want to take back control of our borders and our laws, but A, we're going to keep 90% of the laws, and B, we're certainly not going to close the borders. Why would we do it? It would be insane. And it's that ultra-lever part of the Tory party in Parliament that she wants to diminish the influence of by getting a much bigger majority in her own name.
Steve Norris, it's been fantastic, fascinating talking to you. Steve Norris, Tory grandee, touring the horizon with me as we get the 2017 British general election underway. I hope you've enjoyed the show. It's been marvellous.